Hello! So October is Disability Awareness Month, and in preparation for that, I read a dozen books where the main characters or the central theme in the book is disability. And I wanted to share my least favorite to favorite of those dozen that I read. So my least favorite is Patricia St. John's Star of Light. One of the main characters in this book is a baby who is visually impaired. It just felt so very overtly evangelical, Christian evangelical for my tastes. I didn't necessarily appreciate the negative viewpoint of the people that the missionary was working with. It just fell flat for me on that. Number 11 was Jodie's Journey by Colin Thiel. This took place in Australia, and it was about the main character had debilitating arthritis. There was the main plot centered around her kind of acceptance of this because it was a disability that kind of developed over time, and then her kind of triumph over it. My understanding is that the author also has this disability, and so the viewpoint of the disease and the struggles were very real. The character development maybe wasn't the best, and it just wasn't the most engaging story. Still a great read, especially if you want to incorporate that Australia setting and learning with that as well, but it just wasn't one of the best that I read. The next one is Show Me a Sign, and this one is actually one of the books chosen by Brave Learner for their Arrow, I think, for this year actually. And it is about a community in the Northeast of the United States who are predominantly deaf. It's a deaf community. It's very large. The hearing population is much smaller, and I think there is truth in the base of that story. Where I struggled with this story was reading about such abuse of one of the main characters. Emotional, physical, and honestly, as I've read through a lot of these books where the characters have disabilities, the abuse and mistreatment that they have to experience is a theme running in so many of them. But maybe because Show Me a Sign was one of the earlier ones that I read, I just struggled so much with that abuse part. And I realized that that's an important part of the history of people with disability, but it just was so hard to read, and it just made the book not enjoyable for me. Number 9 was The Truth as Told by Mason Buttle, and this is by Leslie Connor. It actually won National Book Awards. I found this on Book Outlet for a pretty good price, and honestly just thought that I would try reading it without really knowing that much about it, and then lo and behold, the main character has a intellectual disability, basically has like cognitive delay. And while he has to struggle with bullies and unkindness, the reason why I ranked this one kind of in the lower end of the stack is because there was some pretty surprising levels of violence. So there's actually like a murder that takes place, and I think in middle grade novels that is there's a very fine line there. I guess the murder itself was a central theme in this, and it just was hard. Once you get to the end and find out kind of the whodunit part of it, it just, in my mind, made it that much more disturbing. So that's why it ranked a little bit lower. Next is Petey by Ben Mickelson. This is another one that deals with the struggles of mistreatment and abuse. Petey, who was born in 1920, and he has cerebral palsy. And of course, during that time period, people didn't really know or didn't really want to try to find out what it meant to have cerebral palsy or what abilities he had. And so he just was in horrific conditions. As the novel progresses, so you basically find the few people in his life who did make an effort to try to understand him and try to make his life more fulfilling, but it was literally a handful of people. There is redemption in this book, and it ends with an idea of hope in my mind, but again, just difficult to kind of read about that abuse that he had to face. So this is The Solitary by Lynne Hall. I found this in a little free library and grabbed it because the back of it talks about how she has an intellectual disability. But the general plot is, again, there's abuse at the beginning of her life. She, at 18, decides to strike out on her own, and it is her growth and development in the area of finding ways to make her own living, make her own life, then also the fact that she lives alone and what that means for her. So you can see she's got rabbits down here. The main theme here is that she raises rabbits, and of course there are themes in there of rabbits as meat. So just as a possible trigger warning for anyone, there wasn't any extreme plot story. It's really just kind of this experience of her living on her own and learning what that means, which is a great coming of age tale. You can see it's pretty short though, and so there's not a huge amount of character development. But if you can find it, because again, I found it in a little free library and I don't know how easy it is to find, it's certainly worth a read. Number 6 is The Year of Miss Agnes by Kirkpatrick Hill. This is also a really thin read. This has gotten a lot of hype, and I went into this thinking it was just going to be this phenomenal story, even though it is short. One of the characters is blind, and she's not a main character, but I did include it in this because it is such a quick read. So if you're interested in a read aloud, or some of your early readers might be interested in being able to read this, it does give them exposure to inclusion and bringing someone with a disability into a learning environment. It's pretty predictable, but still really cute, and again, it's so quick, it's definitely worth a read. Wonder by R.J. Palacio. I think everybody has heard of this. This was a reread for me. I have not seen the movie. I don't know if I even really will. This is obviously a really great book to get in the hands of pretty much everyone, with the idea of acceptance, inclusion, not bullying, considering where someone has come from and what their life could be like in this situations. Not only is this a reread, the first time I read it was for my daughter, who was doing a book club for it, and she really enjoyed this. She read it at, I'm gonna say 9 or 10. So it does have some adult themes in there. There's some kind of flippant language about killing yourself. So, but otherwise, it's a great crossover into mainstream reading. So next is A Boy Called Bat by Elena Arnold. I loved A Boy Called Bat so much that from the library we got the next one, which is Bat and the Waiting Game, and then there's another one that's Bat and the End of Everything. And if you put the 3 of them together, it's a decent sized book. So it just breaks up one story into 3 books. Bat is a boy who has autism. Again, it doesn't explicitly come out and say that, but as it describes his tics and his perseveration on certain things and his inability to read into what someone is saying versus what they're actually saying, it has his tactile challenges. I loved how it described his challenges and his kind of mental processes through dealing with that. And it again is a great introduction for your middle grade kids to understand kind of what's going on behind the scenes there. Bat, his mother is a vet, and she comes across a baby skunk. The mother has been injured and didn't make it, and the baby skunk did, and he gets pulled into helping the skunk grow up from being a baby, with the idea that once he's able, the skunk is then reintroduced into the wild. So we love this series. It is also on Scribd as well, so if you have a membership to Scribd, you can listen to it as an audiobook. So number 3 is A Song for a Whale by Lynne Kelly. I loved this book. I could have chosen this as my favorite of all of the books that I read. The top 3 really just are all phenomenal. This is about a 12-year-old girl who was born deaf. She is in a classroom of all hearing people. She has a community of deaf people in her life. Her grandmother and grandfather, I think, are both deaf, but she learns about this whale who sings at a different decibel level than all the other whales in his community and all the other whales that he comes across. And so she kind of makes a connection with that whale of feeling like no one can hear him, and he's lonely. And so she, you know, with being deaf, has this infatuation or passion for radios and decibel levels and fixing them and sound. And so she decides that she wants to try to communicate with this whale. And it is her journey, coming of age, coming to finding community in the deaf community as well as in the hearing community. And I just really loved this book. This is technically not a middle grade. It's called The Murmur of the Bees by Sophia Segovia. It is really long. It's 460 pages. It is a translated Mexican novel, and because it's translated, the language is, you know, not on your lower level. It is more of an adult read. There are chapters on the Mexican Revolution. The 1918 pandemic is involved in here, but there's nothing, you know, overtly scandalous or inappropriate for your tween, early teen readers. So it's just about a young boy who is born with physical challenges and deformities, and how he deals with, and the family around him as well, deals with kind of the cultural stigma and even superstition surrounding his arrival in town, and then his physical deformity, and how superstition and bitterness can really have a seed planted that then comes out with dire consequences. This was just such a great read that I wanted to include it in this list. And then number one was The Insignificant Events in the Life of a Cactus by Dusty Bowling. This was surprising for me to choose as the first one. When I first started it, I wasn't sure about it. So Avon Green is the main character. She was born without arms, and it is her struggles with moving as a family to a new town and having to start all over in a community of people who haven't been around her since she grew up. She, you know, in the town she originally was in, everybody had already kind of gone through learning about how she eats and you know, how she writes, and so she didn't have to explain all the time what was going on. But when she moved to a new town, she had to go through all of that again. And then there's a mystery there that was also really fun. You know, possibly slightly predictable, but maybe not. So it was my favorite, entertaining, engaging. I learned a lot. She also has a friend in there who has Tourette's, and she helps him come to an acceptance of his disability. And it just was a really beautiful telling of two young adults, older kids, who recognized their disabilities but saw each other's abilities and then challenged each other in kind of what their, you know, when they were reticent to do things. It just was really a great story. So that was my 12 books that I read where you had a character or main character or theme surrounding disability. So hopefully you are able to choose maybe even just one of these books to read yourself, to read with your kids, to read with friends in book club in October, since, as I mentioned, October is Disability Awareness Month. If you have any suggestions for books where the character has a disability or disability is a theme, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. Hopefully I'll be able to find them at the library or pick them up myself and read them. Would love to hear your thoughts on any of these books that I've mentioned that you may have already read. Until next time. Golly dang, what is that word? Was The Insignificant Life, what is it?